They are dropping 120 tons of poison onto a pristine island in the middle of the ocean. I know it sounds like an environmental disaster, but by the end of this video, you will understand why this became one of the greatest rescue efforts ever carried out. For the past 100 years, Campbell Island had been dominated by one invasive species, rats. Not a few thousand, but 200,000 rats had wiped out almost every living creature, pushed this ecosystem to the edge of collapse, and drove a native bird species to extinction. To repair this mistake, 19 people carried out an unprecedented helicopter baiting campaign. But if just one pregnant rat survived, everything would be meaningless. Let's see how they did it. The rapid collapse of Campbell Island actually began with the very way it was born. Tens of millions of years ago, when this island separated from the rest of the world, it carried a fatal evolutionary trait: there were no land mammals at all. No wolves, no bears, no weasels, no cats. In evolutionary biology, there is a concept called island syndrome. When creatures are isolated in an environment with no natural enemies, they begin to change in extremely strange ways. Insects no longer need to run away, so they develop into giants. The island was filled with giant weta, and megaherbs grew leaves as large as umbrellas to capture the rare sunlight of the polar region. But the greatest change happened among the birds. Campbell Island was an ecological stronghold of the sky. It was a fortress for the southern royal albatross, the largest flying bird on Earth, with a wingspan reaching 3 meters. Millions of birds nested directly on the ground without needing to hide. And among them was one special resident, the Campbell Island teal. Because this small, nocturnal duck had lived for countless generations without needing to take off and escape any predator, it evolved in a very special direction. It gave up the ability to fly, its wings became reduced, and it spent its entire life moving on the ground, building nests beneath grass tussocks. It was a world built entirely on one false assumption that this safety would last forever. But they did not know that beyond the horizon, human interference was coming. In the 19th century, whaling and sealing fleets began expanding their operations into Antarctic waters. Whale oil was the fuel that lit much of the Western world at the time, and when these huge wooden ships anchored at Campbell Island to shelter from storms, they accidentally released a severe ecological destroyer: Norway rats. Imagine it this way. For native creatures that had never known the existence of land predators, they swim well, climb well, have jaws capable of chewing through bone, and above all, their reproductive speed is almost impossible to control. 2 rats can turn into 2,000 in just 1 year if there is enough food. And Campbell Island, with millions of bird eggs lying directly on the ground, was an abundant and defenseless food source. In a short time, the rats reached a density almost unheard of in global ecological history: 200,000 rats on one rocky island. Every few square meters, there was another rat constantly searching for food. The result was a chain reaction of ecosystem collapse. Rats ate native insects, they chewed the roots of endemic plants, and most devastating of all, they completely destroyed the flightless teal. Nest after nest, chick after chick, was eaten. The island's birdsong gradually faded, replaced by squeaking and the alarming sound of gnawing in the night. By the early 20th century, scientists around the world had to write one tragic conclusion into the red list: Campbell Island teal officially extinct forever. The island paradise had become a kingdom of rodents. Everything seemed to be over. Until one day in 1975. If you look at a map of Campbell Island, a few kilometers offshore there is a rugged rock rising from the sea called Dent Island. It is barren, has no landing beach, stands steeply above the water, and was completely ignored by the world, but it had one priceless advantage: enough ocean distance that rats could never swim there. In 1975, a biological expedition risked danger to climb onto this 23-hectare rock. And inside the dark cracks between the stones, they saw something unbelievable. A few dark shapes stepped out. They were Campbell Island teal. They were not dead. A tiny, fragile population of about 30 to 50 individuals had somehow migrated to this rock and survived there for an entire century. They were the last representatives of the whole species. This discovery shook the conservation world, but it also came with a terrifying truth: just one major storm, one rockslide, or one single rat accidentally clinging to driftwood and reaching Dent Island could wipe the species out instantly. Their survival was incredibly fragile. Scientists could not gamble with nature. They captured a few of these precious birds and brought them to a conservation center on the mainland. The plan was simple: breed them in captivity, build a large enough population, then return them to Campbell Island. But this process was not easy. The ducks could not reproduce naturally in the new environment. For nearly 20 years, from the 1980s to the early 90s, not a single egg was laid. The ducks were nocturnal, shy, mysterious, and because no one had ever studied them properly in the wild, humans had almost no data on how to trigger their breeding cycle. Experimental diets, experimental environments, experimental lighting, everything failed. Scientists were almost desperate. Until 1994, when a female named Daisy finally accepted a mate and laid the first clutch of ducklings, the biological secret had been unlocked. From that clutch, the flock gradually grew to dozens, then hundreds of individuals. But ironically, they now faced the biggest dead end. The ducks were ready to go home, but their home was occupied by 200,000 invasive predators. You cannot release flightless ducks into an environment filled with danger unless you eliminate every single one of them. And so, the boldest campaign of the century began. To eliminate rats from an island covering 11,000 hectares, humans could not use mousetraps or cats. The only option was to distribute ecological bait from the air. But what was the tool? Scientists chose brodifacoum, an extremely powerful anticoagulant. Why this chemical? Because if they used ordinary poison, rats would die immediately, and other rats could easily recognize the bait as toxic and avoid it. Brodifacoum works slowly. It makes rats feel extremely thirsty several days after eating, driving them deep into burrows to search for water and die there. This helps eliminate them thoroughly, while also preventing rat carcasses from contaminating the surface. 120 tons of grain bait treated with the compound were transported by a huge ship through dangerous seas to reach Campbell Island in the winter of 2001. Why choose the harshest winter? Because that was when natural food sources on the island were at their lowest, forcing rats into severe hunger and making them eat almost anything that fell from the sky. At the same time, in winter, most sensitive native bird species had migrated away from the island, minimizing the risk of secondary poisoning. A team of 19 people was completely isolated on the island. They had only 3 months. Their mission was to spread 120 tons of bait over every square meter of the 11,000-hectare island. Miss 1 square meter, and 1 rat could escape. The first challenge: weather. Campbell Island has rain more than 300 days a year. The winds are strong enough to knock down a grown adult. Pilots had to take advantage of every rare, clear hour to fly at maximum capacity. The second challenge: technology. They used the most advanced satellite GPS positioning technology available at the time, connected directly to aircraft screens. Pilots had to fly in perfectly straight lines, spaced only a few meters apart. At times, They had to guide helicopters close to vertical cliffs 250 meters high, flying only 15 meters from the rock face, fighting upward gusts from the sea in order to drop bait into caves on the cliffs. The third challenge: giant birds in the sky. Campbell Island was still home to albatrosses with 3-meter wingspans. At high speed, albatrosses cannot judge the distance from helicopter rotors. If just one bird struck the tail of an aircraft, the helicopter could fall straight into the Southern Ocean, and the pilot would certainly face disaster. They flew on the edge between life and death every day. Then, after 3 exhausting months, the final bait pellet was dropped. The helicopters left, and an absolute silence settled over the island. Now came the waiting. 2 years later, in 2003, patrol teams returned. They brought specially trained dogs to sniff out rat scent. They checked every rocky outcrop, every log. They searched for a dropping, a scratch mark, a footprint. The result? Nothing. All 200,000 rats had been wiped out. Not a single one survived. It was the largest successful island rat eradication campaign ever recorded in human history, 6 times larger than any previous effort anywhere in the world. Once the heavy burden of rats was removed, the island began a powerful recovery process. Nature showed humans its astonishing ability to heal. Humans did not need to plant trees. Humans did not need to bring insects back. Everything exploded on its own. Vegetation once eaten down to exhaustion suddenly sprouted green across the hillsides. Giant weta recovered strongly, multiplying across the island. Seabirds that had previously flown to small offshore islands for refuge automatically returned to the main island to nest. Giant albatrosses could now watch their chicks hatch in complete peace. Life from the edges of the ocean poured noisily into the space the rats had left behind. And finally, the most sacred moment arrived. In 2004, after more than 100 years of exile, 50 Campbell Island teal were brought back to their homeland. But nature gave humans a detail so beautiful it felt like a rare scientific miracle. As the ducks stepped out of their cages, rescuers saw an unbelievable scene. Standing on the shore to welcome them was a lone male duck. Somehow, in an extraordinary way, this male had swum 5 kilometers through rough seas from Dent Island to Campbell Island by himself. He stood there like the last sentry, patiently waiting at the doorway to welcome his own kind back to their ancestral home. Dozens, then hundreds more ducks were released in the following years. From 30 individuals clinging to a battered rock, their population grew to more than 400, roaming freely on an island completely free of mammalian predators. It became one of the most spectacular comebacks in wildlife history. The story of Campbell Island is not only about ducks. It is a powerful message to the entire world. We often look at ecological disasters created by humans and fall into despair, believing extinction is the final ending. But Campbell Island proved the opposite. With technology, with the persistence of dedicated scientists, and with the courage of 19 people who risked their lives in one of the harshest winters on Earth, a 100-year mistake was repaired. It gives us a profound lesson: the wild does not need us to rebuild it. It only needs us to clean up the damage we caused, remove the threats, and then simply step back. Nature will know how to find its way back to life. The Campbell Island mission has become a powerful blueprint for hundreds of other islands around the world that are longing. If this miraculous resurrection story gives you more faith in our planet, press like and subscribe so you will not miss the next documentary footage. For now, thank you for watching, and I will see you again in other mysterious stories from around the world.